is the URL. Welcome, fellow storm riders. You are officially a rider on the hypnotic storm. Welcome to session number 57 of Brain Software with Mike Mandel, and I'm Chris Thompson. He's preparing to carry the hypnotic storm into the desert. Can't stand unnecessary capitalization, and can't say that he isn't entirely unsure that there isn't something that hasn't been misunderstood in that sentence. Welcome to the center of the hypnotic epicenter, Mike Mandel.
Hello, what's going on? What's all this shouting? We'll have no trouble here.
Oh, that's
Great to be back, Chris. Yes, those are three interesting points. We will ignore the stacking negatives of the third one. That was beautifully done, though. I'll give you a solid 10 out of 10 on that.
Thank you.
Taking the hypnotic storm to the desert, yes, Chris and I will both be appearing live in Las Vegas in August for HypnoThoughts, which is promising to be a phenomenal conference. If you are at all interested in hypnosis, come on down and you get to hear me present a couple of times and hang out with us and we'll have a blast.
Absolutely. We've left a plug for this before. It's not our conference. It's Scott Sandlin's conference.
He does a great job.
I believe it's htlive.net is the URL, and it's something like $300 for several days of all-inclusive, all kinds of awesome hypnosis
and jocularity in general.
Right,
wonderful.
So come hang out with us.
Yes, let's get to these unnecessary capitals, Chris. It drives me raving mad.
Unnecessary. Okay.
Standard.
And then I promise we are getting into some very cool discussion today that will involve some hypnosis and some personal development and all kinds of great stuff.
All of the above.
So unnecessary capitalization, what is that, Mike?
Chris, it drives me crazy because, with graphology, it depends on someone ideally using cursive script. So they're going to reveal all these 200 different personality traits that interlock in different ways, creating a full personality. Sometimes people only print, in which case it's problematic because certain traits completely disappear. But there are some traits that actually show up even in emails and in typed text. Did you know that?
Well, I do now because I have an idea of what you're going to be talking about here.
Unnecessary capitalization is a classic one. And when you see people putting capital letters at the beginning of words that have no reason to be capitalized because they're not names or place names or anything like that, just a sentence with, the word me and it's capital M and then a few other words that are all capitalized.
I would imagine especially in the capital M for me.
That would be indicative of something true. But when I see an email with tons of caps, it raises a red flag for me right away. In fact, red flags just start going up all over the place. That is the trait of wanting to be perceived as important without doing anything to earn it. So this is the person who sits back on their laurels, thinks they're great, wants everyone else to treat them as though they're great, even though they've actually done nothing whatsoever towards this. And so I'm saying all this because it drives me crazy when I see it. And it also causes me to red flag emails right away. We get emails all the time from all over the world. And occasionally I'll get one that is replete with unnecessary capital letters. And as soon as I see it, Christopher, the warning bells go off loud and clear and the red flags go up. So if you unnecessarily capitalize, realize you are attempting to be perceived as more important than you are, and your handwriting is giving you away.
And it's interesting because this can be completely unconscious. Is that not true?
Well, all writing is essentially unconscious, is it not?
Well, what I mean is, if you're typing, you're not planning to capitalize those words. You're just doing it. You're not saying, "Oh, I'll put a capitalization here just because." Oh, what the heck? It looks good.
Right. It's like the unnecessary quotation marks. Remember, we got an email late last year from a man, and on every line there were at least 2 or 3 words with quotation marks around them. Things like, well, if I'm going to the so-called conference to study so-called hypnosis...
And he didn't use the word so-called.
No, that's me putting the...
Yeah, Mike is marking out the quotes.
The quotes.
With so-called.
I'd like to work with a live so-called class with other so-called people.
Students, yeah.
I mean, it was crazy. And I just wrote back to him. I said, I can't figure out, who are you quoting? You see, quotation marks are only to quote someone. They are not for emphasis. They're not to make something seem so-called special or so-called more interesting.
People seem to use quotes as markers of emphasis these days, and it's wrong.
Right. If you must emphasize, use bold or use italics or something.
Right. Now, there's a reason, Mike, that you always hold people to a higher standard in communication in the field of hypnosis, and that is because...
Well, words are our tool in hypnosis. And in the English language, you can say more things in more ways and with more shades of meaning than any other language. And I say you need a good toolbox where you are speaking accurately and clearly. And to throw these things out the window is just shoddy work.
You just want to build credibility. And if you write in a way that is unprofessional, inaccurate, wrong, it doesn't help credibility. It doesn't help the industry.
Pretty well beaten this horse today.
All right.
Let's move on.
So, unnecessary capitalization. One thing we can also say about it, though, before we move on, is when it comes to handwriting, something you teach in graphology, and the class is in September in Toronto, weird writing, weird person.
Weird lower zones below the baseline. Really weird person. That's right.
And so some of this shows up in
Check out our
text.
courses online. Yeah, we do have that coming up in September. It's a weekend-long graphology course. You'll learn some cool stuff.
All right. Now, before we get on to some of the hypnotic discussion, let's just announce the winner of our podcast competition.
Wonderful winner.
On podcast number 56, if you recall, we did a couple of context-free humor bits, one of which is the tag teaming, which we'll explain it. Well, we won't really explain it. We'll just let you go back to podcast 56.
Go and listen to it again.
And the other one was stacking negatives, which we used in the intro, which is a lot of fun. So go back to 56 if you want to listen to those and learn how to do those things. Anyway, we had a great submission from Matthew in El Paso.
The young Texan.
Right, in Texas. And so it just so happens that he's got a buddy who also listens to our podcast. So the two of them decided to just deploy this at some point at a pub, I guess probably shortly after he listened to the podcast. The quick and dirty version is they were at a pub with a friend of theirs, and I guess over a beer, this guy... Why am I saying I guess?
I don't know.
Let's add that to the list of things we're going to talk about. I guess.
All right.
It's a horrible... I've got to change that. Okay. So they were at a pub, and a friend of theirs brought up this idea that he, being a PC guy, can't understand why anybody would pay so much for Apple products, and he was ranting about how Apple products are all overpriced. And so they fired back, Mike, with something like, right, a few months ago, I took my grandmother to play bingo, and this one lady just kept yelling bingo, even though her card wasn't full, and it annoyed everybody. It's exactly the same thing.
There is no difference.
Which, anyway, we loved that submission. So
he sat there looking stunned and freaked out.
You can just imagine.
And when he tries to clarify, of course, all they do is repeat what they're doing with even greater fervor and intensity, which just drives the person into the corner. So what is he getting? The download of his choice?
Yes, absolutely. Great. So we'll email you, Matthew, of course, in case you don't listen to this one. But we know you're listening.
Only one Matthew in El Paso, Texas. Probably him.
So it's just wonderful. Do you want to recap what this is, or just have people go back to podcast 56?
No, then go back and look at it yourself. Listen to it.
It's quite funny.
Yes.
So you're agreeing with someone, and then you're driving the conversation somewhere bizarre.
Talking about it, even though we said we weren't going to.
I know it's the 9 Enneagram.
Let's get on to some questions from the mailbag.
First, well, we have. Do you want to go to the mailbag first, or the hypnosis in the news bit that we wanted to cover?
I'm a real believer that one should always begin with the mailbag.
All right, that's great. Let's start with the mailbag then. So we got a question from Michael. And I'm just going to leave his name as Michael and not read the last name because, well, it's his personal question. So I'm going to read it, and then you can respond, Mike. I work a 9-to-5 job, and for the past year, I've been listening to audiobooks and podcasts at work. Mostly everything I listen to is related to the power of our minds, and my thinking has certainly become stronger. I'm very much in a routine and can pretty much do my job unconsciously. It has only been recently that I've been feeling as if I'm living in the third person. I've Googled some keywords and immediately found depersonalization and derealization. The question I have is, could my routine have anything to do with this feeling and the fact that my job has absolutely no fulfillment? Or could it be possibly related to my newfound awareness towards the power of my mind? Have you or anyone you've known experienced this, and do you have any recommendations? Any advice would be much appreciated. You guys rock.
Excellent. Now, didn't he also say something like, "Oh, and I'm not depressed or
no,
unhappy with my job"? He didn't say that at the PS.
No, that's the entire email. The discussion about depression is another thing we had on the agenda.
All right. Well, I confuse all of these people with these wonderful questions.
Actually, you start answering. I'm going to just check.
Okay, well, depersonalization syndrome is something I'm quite well familiar with. I helped someone deal with that back in 2004, I think it was, working with a rock star. It's a fairly famous case I've alluded to in the past. And he suffered from depersonalization syndrome, which was a profound sense of dissociation because it was traceable to smoking so much dope. And regardless of the fact that you can get marijuana legally in a lot of places now, I think including Ontario, if your doctor prescribes it, the people I know who smoke dope all the time tend to become kind of dopey. I find it makes them passive and withdrawn. Well, in his case, he had withdrawn so much, Chris, that he was actually no longer able to kinesthetically access his own life. In other words, it seemed as though his entire life was occurring on a movie screen. He was dissociated from everything.
And that's what Michael sounds to be describing,
right?
But caused not from dope.
Not as far as we know. Now, the thing that's interesting is he's putting it in the context of doing a mindless, repetitive job, right?
Perhaps, although I just checked the email, and you're right, he did have a PS. It says, P.S. I am not at all depressed about my life or my job.
Sometimes, Frodo, you must discover these things for oneself. Anyway, so he's talking about in this the work environment, the routine environment, and that's where he was noticing it. Now, he asks if this is an extension of him just becoming more self-aware, which it probably is that to a degree.
Right.
And it may also be the very fact that he's just able to dissociate in order to get his job done well. He's probably dissociating from what may feel like an essentially meaningless task. Now, what you do not know here, Chris, that I find kind of interesting, is when someone forms a letter of the alphabet with a descender. Now, a descender is in a letter like a small letter G. This is cursive script, or Y, where a loop goes down. It forms below the baseline. A stem goes down, comes back in a loop, and then off to the right. That's how they're typically done. If those loops are extremely short, not talking about the volume of the loop, but if they're short, that is someone who is well able to do a simple, repetitive task over and over and over without it getting to them.
Right.
So my guess is, Michael, you're not crazy to use the medical word. My guess, my opinion is simply that you have found a way of coping with this, with a job that isn't particularly stimulating to you and your level of intelligence, and you found a way of dissociating from it. I don't think, in my opinion, it would be anything beyond that.
It could be, yeah. Now, the other thing is, when somebody, we were talking about this earlier, let's say somebody is used to having a standard meal all the time, repetitively eating the same meal.
When you say standard meal?
Whatever standard meal is for them. They always eat the same thing.
Okay.
Let's say it's something boring, nothing particularly exciting. And then they go out and have a gourmet meal. Somebody cooks them a delicious, amazing meal. And so they have this taste for something different. And then they go back to the same old boring meal.
Which is horrible now.
Now they're aware of a higher level of quality of eating. And they're not there. So is it possible, too, that because he's been listening to all these podcasts and audiobooks and development material, that he's now discovering that there are other things he perhaps would like to do? And maybe what he really needs to do is stop and evaluate, what do I want? Yeah,
it's a very good point, Chris, because the law of comparison certainly kicks in here. Although typically the law of comparison is when things are directly checkable next to each other. They're in proximity to each other. But in something like this, your meal example works quite well as a metaphor or an analogy here. That could very well be the case. And it is certainly true that when one raises the bar to an huge, infinitely high level, like you've been saying, it's been infinite. What do you say? Minus infinity here in Toronto.
Oh, the temperature. Yeah.
The temperature.
It's warmer
when you
now.
Raise a bar in anything really, really high, by comparison, everything that is not that seems drab, boring, and so on. And, in fact, Dr. Robert Cialdini gives a great example of this. Say you go in to buy a pool table, and you finally talked your spouse into letting you have a pool table in your basement. You have these dreams of having your buddies round. You're all going to have beers and chalk up your scores on the board. And this is going to be your normal Wednesday night now. And it's really exciting. So you go round to Pool Tables or Us, or whatever the store is.
Right.
And when you get there, you say, I want to spend, and you say, $3,000 on this pool table. And can I get a pretty nice? Yeah, we can give you a pretty good one for that. There's one over here. But before I show it to you, I just want you to see our absolute Rolls Royce super high-end pool table. Now,
sure.
Not that you're going to buy it. I just want you to see what the possibilities are. Now, the amateur would think that you start by showing the person the cheapest one and then say, for an extra $500, you can have this. And for an extra $300, you can have this. And you keep working your way up with options until you bought a more expensive one. Well, the clever salesperson knows how to use the law of comparison. And instead, he shows you the absolute ultimate one, so that when you now look at the one you were planning on getting, it looks like crap.
And you talk yourself into spending more money.
Because people buy with emotions and justify with
logic.
Facts.
Right.
So it's always comparisons happening, and we've sort of gone a little bit astray there, Frodo, but we will continue.
Absolutely. In fact, real estate agents will often take new clients to homes that might be overpriced and crappy. And then they'll show them better homes. Oh, now you're doing the finishing my sentences.
Isn't that annoying?
Yes, it is. Is this something you want to talk about?
The funniest is when you just do the last syllable or just the T. You know, something you want to talk about, the other guy just goes, T. You can drive people nuts with that. My wife will probably stab me in the head if I ever do that again. I did it for an entire afternoon, and she was ready to kill me. She'd say something, is dinner almost ready? And she'd hear me from the other room, D. Just finishing the ready.
So if you want to get good at practicing people, this, you just use the last syllable. Because we can think much faster than we can speak. That's really good, Mike. Okay, let's continue on. What else do we have here? Let's talk about the idea of threshold, because we have recently we got an email, but we've been getting plenty of emails from people. Stop it.
I want to get I know. Got it finally.
Let's get back to being serious though, because we have to justify our time in front of the computer here by actually helping people, not just making jokes. Right?
All right. Well, I always forget, Chris, because I've run my life this way since I was 5 years old.
So we wanted to talk about this. This is a really important one. Sometimes people will send us an email and it'll say something like, will you see my friend Bob?
Right.
Because he is depressed or upset, whatever it is. He has an issue.
And it's usually a pretty heavy one when we get these emails.
And, he just needs to have a conversation or a hypnosis session, whatever it is. And if you could just get back to me and let me know when you could see him or when you could see her, whatever it is, that would be great. And so our response will typically be, depending on the situation, sure, we can help you.
Get your friend to contact us.
Have Bob email me or call me or whatever it is at this number, at this email address, etc.
Right, because we're talking about threshold here, and we run into this all the time. There's people who Chris sees clients, I see clients occasionally, and a lot of the time it's not the client directly; it's someone who, like Chris said, is acting on behalf of the client. Very often, the would-be client doesn't even know that we've been communicated with.
Right. If the sender of the email is not willing or able to hand off the communication to the person who requires the help.
Yeah.
Or let's say does, and then the person who requires the help doesn't email us, doesn't call us. They don't want help. They are not at threshold.
And Chris, threshold is when something has to change. It has to be me, and it has to be now. Yeah. If it isn't those three, I realize it's got to change, it's got to be me, but it's not now. They're not a threshold. Or something has to change, it's got to be right now, but it isn't me, it's you, and that's not threshold. And Chris, with all these emails, I can't recall that we have ever had one where we have said, have the person contact us directly and we'll see if we can help.
And the person's actually
done it. Not even once. And I do not do third-party interventions with anybody. I have an abysmal track record. My wife and I were looking at the evidence on this, helping couples in their marriage, all different things. Oh, I know if you talk to her, Mike, she'll listen. Oh, if you just drive up there, look, it's not going to work. Back in those days, I used to get talked into it. And I have a record of dealing with, I think, 10 people based on the intervention of a third party. Oh, Mike, I know you can help him. And out of 10, I have failed 10 times. Yeah, absolute zero kill ratio there. So I just don't do it anymore. And then people try to get me through guilt. They say, well, it wouldn't hurt to try. Actually, no, it would hurt to try because it's wasting my time when I could be doing something valuable for someone else.
So exactly. Let's bring this back to the point then, which is, if somebody is looking to get access to your time and you calibrate that they are not totally serious or that it involves some third party that's not yet into this situation, always throw back some task on them to do. Because a lot of the time, the task won't get done and your time won't get wasted.
Well, Chris, you had a case where one of our martial arts students had a weight problem, and he supposedly wanted to lose the weight, and you had calibrated that there didn't seem to be a lot of focus here. And you had given him a simple task, which I thought was really clever.
Yeah, do you want me to talk about that?
It wasn't redirecting the river through the Stygian stables like Hercules had to do. But yeah, talk about that.
So we won't use names, obviously, but there was a young man, and he wanted some help. He said he wanted some help with losing weight. And I said, no problem. I'd be happy to help you. And here is how we're going to do things for the first few days. I need to get a baseline from you. So I don't want you to change anything about your behavior at all, about how you eat, how you move, etc. All I want you to do is for the next 3 days, when you have something that you're about to eat, just take a quick photo of it with your phone and then send me the photo on Facebook Messenger.
So you didn't even make any constraint as to what he could eat.
Yeah.
All he had to do was consistently follow through and take a picture of his food before he ate it.
Yeah, just send me a photo of what you're about to eat so that I can know what we're starting with, because then we can start to make the necessary changes to improve the quality of your life, etc.
That was nicely embedded.
Yeah.
So, Analog Mark, how many did he do?
1.
Okay.
So this was at night. This was there was no eating happening at this point in the conversation, and
right.
I surmise he did not go home and eat any food. In the morning, he sent me a photo at around 11 a.m. and confirmed that this was the first food of the day. And I said, wonderful, keep going. I got nothing else.
Yeah.
And so I did not get involved.
But the point is, Chris, it's your fault.
Yeah, clearly it's
your fault.
Right. So that's an example of putting the ordeal back on the other person to do something. If you're going to require my time to help you, if you're asking for my time, then I'm going to ask you to do something first to show that you're serious.
I'm going to put you at cause. Remember, the great Milton Erickson, the greatest hypnotist of all time, he had a subject or client, in his case, patient, because he was a psychiatrist and a medical doctor, a patient who would lie awake at night, not be able to sleep. And he gave the subject the task of get a bottle or a can of Johnson's floor wax and some old rags, and you have hardwood floors in your house. And when you go to bed, if you look at the clock and it's any time after 11 p.m. and you see that time, you have to get up and wax your floor all night on your hands and knees.
Horrible.
Now, the weird thing is Erickson would demand people did this stuff, and they would do it. They would do it. Like, he'd say to someone, I want you to get out there and get these shears and go and trim the rose bushes all the way around my house. And the person would be crawling around their hands and knees, covered with thorn, punctures in their arms, cursing him with every part of their being, but they'd still do it. Yeah. And they'd get a therapeutic benefit from it. So anyway, the man cleans the floor. He does the ordeal. And the next night, he looks at the clock and it's 11:15. He's all mad and he gets up and waxes the floor again. And then the third night, he just gets up and he says, well, I'm just going to close my eyes for a few minutes. And conks right out and wakes up in the morning. And then all he had to do was leave the Johnson's floor wax beside the bed and the rags, and then he slept through the night from then on. Now, the key is Erickson prescribed an ordeal that put the client, the subject, the patient, back at cause. He was no longer someone who life was happening to. He was taking authority and control in his own life. Mm-hmm. Greek word is exousia.
Right. Now, let's take this back to the example of taking photos. If your job is take photos of your food, show me your baseline of what you're eating so I can help you. Well, you can imagine what are the excuses going to be? They're going to be typically things like, well, Chris, you just don't understand. My life's very stressful. My boss is very demanding on me, and this is happening and that is happening. And of course, all that to say, and how does that affect your ability to take photographs?
Yeah.
It doesn't, right?
It's all distraction. Yeah,
right.
All red herrings. Yeah.
So, all right.
Unbelievable.
All right. So what else do we have?
Let's look at some of these linguistic things that drive me insane.
Yeah. Okay. We had this on our list.
Chris and I caught ourselves saying, I mean. And if you want to hear someone say, I mean, way more times than you ever want to hear them say, I mean, watch the amazing movie, My Dinner with Andre, where Wally Shawn plays himself. I think he is incapable of framing a sentence without the words I mean.
Because it's redundant. If you're going to say what you think or say what you mean, you don't need to start by saying, I mean.
Right.
We know you mean it because you're saying it.
You wouldn't be saying it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do we start by saying, I'm kidding when you're about to tell a joke?
Yeah.
Of course not.
Right. It drives me nuts. It's unnecessary. We had a minister at a church we used to go to many years ago, and this guy would say, we have all this freedom, folks, but I'm not saying you should go out there and rob banks. I'm not saying that at all. And I'd want to yell, then don't say it.
Right.
You see, you can tell what someone isn't saying because they don't have to say it. They don't have to tell you they're not saying it.
Which we use as a tool when we're using language. We do. I am not going to tell you that you need to write down everything you eat and document it so that you'll focus on it. to change.
Right. I used to do that with clients when I'd be dealing with someone on the phone who was wondering whether to hire me to come in and do a fairly expensive keynote for them and pay all my expenses. And they said, well, we're considering a couple of other speakers.
Oh,
and I'd
this
say,
is
that's
great.
fantastic. I'm glad you are. I want you to do that. I'm not going to say that I'll be the best speaker you've ever had. I'm not going to say that. I want you to find that out for yourself. And they would always hire me.
Right.
Because they'd want to find out too.
Absolutely.
And it puts the onus back on them to discover that.
So, I mean...
Terrible. Yada, yada.
It's an unconscious pattern, by the way, and I want to just come back to this because...
I'm already on yada.
I think I even said it. I have to go and listen to this, rewind and listen to it again, but I'm pretty sure that as we were talking about the idea that why would someone say, I mean, and then I went... I mean, la 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 la, or whatever.
Another meaningless
which we're going to bring
la,
up.
la, la, la,
okay.
Which is right up there with yada yada yada.
And blah blah blah.
You got to blame Jerry Seinfeld for yada 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 because everybody started doing it after that, and it was quite funny for a while. But when it became de rigueur, it was really really annoying. Blah 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 is another. I've been jumping on my wife's case about this because she's been saying this one. Oh, you go to the cottage and this and blah blah blah, and I say you're not saying words. You don't have to say blah, blah, say words.
So if you want to be an elegant communicator...
Or an eloquent communicator.
Elegant, eloquent. You will say actual words. You will say what you mean without pre-framing it as I mean.
Yes, otherwise you're in danger in your elegance and eloquence of offering an elegiac to them. And we do not want that. So yes, say words. Watch out for blah, blah, blah. That's a terrible one. The one I can't stand too. I have only heard one guy do it. He used to do it all the time. He'd get into these Ken Sweatman stories that were extremely long. It wasn't Ken, but he would say ta-da, 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 like it was a trumpet. Like it was a trumpet, ta-da, 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 right? And he'd say, but it was filler while he thought. He'd say, so we got to the store and we sat down and ta-da, 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 and it's like saying and so on and so on.
Yes.
It's filler. This is filler. Cut the filler out of your language.
So what would you prefer people say instead?
Words.
Give me an example. Let's start with... I went to the store and insert filler here. What would you say if you were going to tell somebody?
No filler.
So you would just say, I went to the store.
Yeah.
And you would not put in the filler because it's unnecessary.
Absolutely.
It's a waste of space.
Right.
It's a waste of time.
It's like long ums.
Right.
The other one bothers me is the right. Not the one you
correct.
When people say,
I understand which one you mean.
So we got there, right?
We got there, right?
We're like sitting around the tent, right? And so it's getting dark, right? And when they do that, my antidote is I immediately go, right.
And you lean in.
And lean in really
as if that was an actual question.
Yes. So we get to the tent, right? Right.
Right, that's correct.
Yeah. And they stop pretty quickly after that. What about the yeah, no?
That is one I cannot stand. It seems so...
I knew that one bothered you.
It seems so common these days. Someone will be telling a little story about what happened, and then they want to shift gears, so they go, yeah, no, so we're really looking forward to your visit next weekend.
Oh, that's
what
bad
is
enough.
It's like this change of conversation that's about to take place, and they use no as the segue.
Oh, terrible. My brother-in-law, one of them, he actually will do this like 4 or 5 times in a row. I'm not kidding. So, we'll get there. No, I'm not kidding. It's like, I want to drive my thumbs in his eyes.
So what should we do when we hear that? Other than just...
Drive your thumbs in his eyes? I don't have a solution, Chris, other than to...
That's our question to you today then, folks.
How do we stop people doing
should we respond? Not what that was an incomplete sentence. How should we respond?
I don't know. It's the same as when I'm just sitting here clasping my face in stress, as you can see.
Yes.
To me, it's as annoying as the sentences that go up. Now, in hypnosis, we have a sentence rise at the end, which becomes interrogative. It becomes a question. You're sitting in that chair?
Yes.
It's a question, right? If you say it flatline, you're sitting in that chair, it becomes a statement.
We're going to dinner.
Right. Now, when you drop something at the end, it becomes a command. Sit in that chair.
Right.
Right? So you're dropping it. When people do the questioning interrogative end of the sentence going up when it's not necessary, I can't stand it. So they were like sitting there.
Absolutely.
And they went outside, and we were like in the yard, and a bunch of people. Don't get me going on like. Is there a teenage or 20-something woman in the world in Western society who was able to speak without saying like continuously?
The only time you should use that phrase is when you're comparing. It's like such and such and such and
you're
such,
making
whatever
a comparison,
it is that you're saying,
or that you like something,
right?
But when they say this, like I'm sitting there and he's like coming in the door,
like a marker, as if it's a marker. Not like I just used it correctly there.
In the door, or
like,
is he coming in the door? You know,
right.
which one is it? So anyway, enough of this soapbox pontification. We'll step aside from it.
There was I did want to make a comment about that though. The intonation. So remember, was it 1 or 2 Architecture of Hypnosis classes ago? I started making substantial investments in Post-it notes and bringing them to class.
Oh, yes,
because then when people are going through and practicing their hypnotic techniques with their partner,
room full of people,
I can write something on the Post-it note like slow down and stick it to them.
Forehead.
That way I don't have to interrupt their practice. I
Right.
can just stick it to their arm or their shoulder or whatever, and they can read it and look at the feedback later.
Yep.
So then when we're having our open frame discussion, people can understand.
You just went discussion?
Without a discussion. I didn't intonate upwards. But that's one thing we will see with people who tend to talk like that, is they'll do hypnosis and you're sitting in the chair and you're starting to really relax. That's right.
Yeah.
And it's this constant intonation upwards.
There was a stage hypnotist, Michael C. Anthony, who's freaking brilliant, the best stage hypnotist in the world. Absolutely is. He brought this guy to my attention. And this guy had obviously picked up on Milton Erickson's That's Right, which is the universal amplifier. So those of you not familiar, when someone starts to go into trance, we say, that's right. And it amplifies whatever's happening. And if I see his eyelids fluttering, I'll say, that's right. Well, this guy did an upward intonation. Sit in the chairs, that's right. And you're beginning to relax, that's right. Oh, I cringe, Chris. Everything is so cringeworthy. Hey, now get to this. You were talking about stories that we tell ourselves just before we went on the air.
Yes. We were just looking through some of our past notes of podcast show ideas. And one of the questions that, I wouldn't even say it's a question, it was just some context that I reminded myself of from our notes. This isn't making any sense at all.
No, not at all.
That's okay.
We'll edit that out.
which really means we won't. We'll leave it all in,
Pretty
of course.
much.
So people will tell themselves all kinds of stories. And I read I can't remember where I got this, but are you using your stories or are your stories using you? That's what I had written down in my notes, and I wish I could remember where I read this. I love the line because it makes a lot of sense. Are you using a story, and obviously you want to use a story if it's helping you, not hurting you, or is your story using you? In other words, has your story become something that is limiting positive effects in your life that you could be having?
So I guess I get your point. I guess another way of looking at this is, are you telling stories to yourself that empower you?
Exactly.
Or are you letting these stories get in your life and disempower you, that you're not really questioning? Like the people who say things like, I never have 10 minutes to myself. They just tell that story all the time.
Right. Or
and then
nobody's hiring.
To fulfill it. Yet nobody's
hiring. The economy is dead. There's no jobs out there. I'll have to stay in the
Nothing works out for me.
Right.
And how does that belief serve you? Oh, goodness. It's interesting. A very interesting book I'm reading right now. I'm going to talk about this in the next podcast, Chris. So I'll make a point of writing down projection. I've been reading The Projection Principle, which is a very interesting book. And the psychologist who wrote it, whose name I do not have at my fingertips at the moment, talks about how when we change our behavior, it then changes our thinking. So the two are in a loop with each other. And he gives the example of if someone treats you badly and they have this idea in their head, the story they're telling themselves is, so you're not worthy of being treated properly. If you confront it assertively but not aggressively and say, look, you're going to start treating me differently. You're not saying, oh, you're going to like me. Through the very act of treating you differently, even though they're doing it intentionally and not from the heart, that begins to change the way they feel about you.
That makes a ton of sense.
So if they treat you with respect, they'll start respecting you, which guess what? It replicates the loop again. It goes around the loop and causes them to do more activities that treat you with respect. In fact, we are so affected by the behavior of other people. If you want someone to like you, you know what is way more important than affirming them, or which is quite surprising. It's counterintuitive. Instead of affirming them so that they like you, the number one thing that makes people like you, you know what it is?
Tell us.
How they feel about themselves
when
in your
they're
presence.
Around you.
Yeah.
Yes.
How you make them feel about them, not how you make them feel about you.
Right, exactly.
That's a really nice sweater you're wearing.
Thank you, Mike. That makes a ton of sense. Nice pattern interrupt.
Yeah.
There was something I want to bring up on that whole point. When you said, you're going to start treating me differently, you're going to behave differently around me.
Treating me with respect, whatever it is, yeah.
You see, this is actually dealing with the symptom, not the symptom, I should say, but the quantifiable or measurable, I don't even know what word to use here, Mike. I'm lost for words.
What else are you lost for?
Right, whiteout.
Oh, no.
As opposed to saying, you don't care, mind reading, instead of mind reading.
You
that's
think
what I am.
No good.
Right, you don't care about me. You don't value me. You're projecting your perception of how they feel onto them. Maybe that's what you meant by projection. I don't know.
Well, we'll get to that next podcast.
Your mind reading, as opposed to actually commenting on something that you can witness,
something quantifiable,
right? Something that can't be thrown away as, oh, well, that's just your opinion, or whatever.
Right. Like verifiable behavior. So by changing the behavior, the feelings then follow, which is very, very interesting. And it's, a lot of people fall in love. And then 3 years later, oh, I don't want her in my life anymore. I want a divorce. I don't love her anymore. Love is an action. Mm-hmm. It's not a syrupy feeling. The syrupy feelings get you together in the first place. Real love is work. And it's I've said this before, my definition is putting the well-being of another person
ahead of
their happiness ahead of your own. And when you do that through activity, through treating that person as though they are more important than you, guess what? The feelings follow very, very rapidly. So, buddy, we're almost wrapping up here.
Yeah, we are. So, let's wrap up here because we've gone on for more than half an hour.
Why don't you give us the empowering question of the day?
All right. The empowering question of the day is, what is the biggest blind spot in your life right now? And what are you prepared to do immediately to correct the situation? What is the biggest blind spot in your life right now? And what are you prepared to do immediately to correct the situation?
Excellent. Get out there and do that.
All right, you got a metaphor for us?
I've got a metaphor, Chris, and this is the metaphor of the woodlot. Many years ago, there was a farmer who had a woodlot at the back of his farm. He had a dairy farm, and in other words, he had a couple of acres of fairly elderly trees, birch, apple, ash, and maple, all of which were hardwood trees and very good for firewood. And a friend of his was over one afternoon and said, have you ever thought of selling some of the wood out of that woodlot? The farmer said, no, I never had. He said, you could make quite a lot of money on it. And this is when wood was about $75 for a face cord. So he said, make a crib that holds exactly a face cord. He said, I'll come around with my chainsaw, cut up the wood, split it for you, season it. And he said, I'll do it for nothing just because you're my friend. He said, you can sell it right off your property and make a little extra money. This seemed like a good idea. And so the man did as he said, cut the wood into 18-inch lengths, split it, seasoned and dried it, stacked it for the farmer and helped him. And the farmer stacked it into the crib that held a face cord of wood. And he began selling them for $75 a face cord. And then he got an idea. He discovered if he took out one piece of split log, nobody would notice it was missing. And he'd still get $75 for the cord. And so he built another crib, and he put this piece of wood in the crib that was his own. And over time, it began to fill up. And feeling rather greedy, he got the idea, well, what if I took two out of each cord? And people still bought and paid the full price. And then it went to 3, and 4, and 5. And soon he had removed so much wood, there was only one piece of wood left inside the crib. And still people were buying it. And he was charging $75. And then he got the idea, why must I give them any wood at all? I can sell them the empty crib. And so he took the last piece of wood out and put it in his own crib. And then people stopped buying. They looked at him with blank expressions, and no one would buy the wood. And he was aghast. He was losing money. But then he remembered he had his own face cord in his own crib that he'd filled from these others. He had a full cord of free wood that he could sell for $75.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everyone for listening. This has been podcast episode 57 of Brain Software with Mike Mandel, and I'm Chris Thompson. Make sure you head on over to our website, MikeMandelHypnosis.com, 1L in Mandel. Sign up for our email list where you can get a copy of Mike's free Brain Software ebook. and lots more stuff that we have for you there. Go to iTunes, leave a rating for the show, and most importantly, enjoy your future and do everything you can to live a more awesome life.
And quickly, Chris and I still see clients. We see a lot of clients around the world by Skype. If you have some generative change, things you want to do better, we can be hired to help you.
Get in touch with us.
Get in touch with us through the website. Have a great one.
Do you think that wins it? Most bizarre ending? Prize? Oh, thank you. Slap my face so hard.